The following episode of Bread for the People is brought to you by Side Hustle Bread, Long Island's handcrafted artisanal bread company. Side Hustle Bread is a family-run virtual bakery that's bringing the neighborhood feel back to Long Island, one loaf at a time. Head on over to sidehustlebread.com for more information, upcoming appearances, and merchandise. My name's Jim Serpico, and this... Should I start with my name? Or should I start with this is Bread for the People? Do you like it like this? Welcome to Bread. Or do you like it like this? Welcome. Ready? Welcome to Bread for the People. Mine... Is there a script? Welcome to Bread for the People. I'm Jim Serpico. My guest today is an American actor and a director. You may know him from the ABC sitcom Step by Step. You may know him from the primetime soap opera Dallas, where he plays the nicer brother and the youngest brother, Bobby Ewing. What you may not know, some of you may know, but I didn't know, he's also a sourdough baker. He's also the co-founder of Duffy's Sourdough, along with his wife, Linda. I'm always happy to have a fellow baker on the podcast. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, it's so nice to be here, and you put the fear in me now. You're a baker too, so you're going to vet everything I say. Oh dear.
I'm going to vet everything you say. On your website, you have a quote. I'd like to start with the quote.
Okay.
Maybe it's Linda's quote. All of this progress continually returns to the simple reality of coming downstairs in the morning and being welcomed by that amazing odor of the starter brimming with new life. The rest of the procedure is my meditation of gratitude when I mix the new batch of batter, knead the dough, and see it rise and blossom.
That's mine.
Now, that's your quote?
Yep.
I can relate to that quote. I would like to hear from you where that really comes from and how you connected to all of this.
Well, it's a long process. If I get too deep in the woods, you can just cut me off. But this sourdough starter, according to the history that's in our website, has been in the family for over 70 years. It was given to my mother in Alaska by a very old woman who claimed it came with the gold miners in the Alaska Gold Rush. We couldn't obviously verify that, but I at least know that it's 73 years old now. And I didn't have any interest in it, to be quite honest, all the time I was growing up. My mother baked. My mother would have sourdough pancakes in the morning. She didn't go into the cinnamon rolls and fruit tarts, etc. It was subsistence baking. And then my sister, when she graduated from high school, took a starter off of Mom's starter. And it still did not interest me until I graduated from college. And my sister would bake for me. I was a starving student, and she would bake rolls and things like that for me. And after I graduated...
Did you guys go to the same college? Because I think you went to the University of Washington?
Yeah, we both graduated from the University of Washington. And she was in the oceanography department, so they would go out and get fish and shrimp and all the other kind of stuff. So I was fed well with seafood and sourdough. But when I graduated from college and went off on my own, it was the time that I really said, well, I've got to do something for myself. And I had no money, and baking was a money-saving operation for me. My sister then pulled a starter off of hers, and I kept that starter, and I would sporadically do it. But what the long story, hopefully culminating now, is I wasn't prepared for the effect of the process when you bake. I was a moderately successful cooker, in other words, and I understood the joy of cooking, but I was always cooking with a glass of wine in my hand. So I wasn't sure where the joy came from. But when you're baking, when you start literally from what looks like a dormant puddle of goo, and you follow the instructions, which my sister gave me. I always kept a pure starter off of the batch. And then I would take that leftover and I would add the ingredients, whatever they happened to be. And it was rudimentary. It was a tiny bit of salt, sugar, flour, stir it up. Every once in a while, I would put in my batch, commercial yeast, just because it speeded up the process. And I would make dinner rolls, and I would survive on those dinner rolls. But it was the process once you start mixing it, and the goo becomes a solid clay-like mixture, and you dump it on the kneading board, and then everything changes. Kneading bread is I every once in a while, I'll tell somebody, you ever see a baby kitten when they're nursing and they just keep those hands moving back, their paws back and forth and back and forth? And kneading bread is like that. I don't know what it touches in terms of your internal mechanism, but it's a satisfying moment when things tend to peripheralize and you are just in that mode of making something living.
Yeah.
At the end of it, it's still just a cannonball size of wad. And then you put it in the bowl and you cover it with a towel. And literally within 2 hours, the towel rises. And it's this gigantic, living, air-filled, delicious smelling substance. And from then on, I go crazy because I got very inventive. I would, roll out small pieces in my hand about the size of a lemon and then take the rolling pin, make them smooth. And I put fruit in the middle and some cinnamon and some nutmeg and a dollop of jam or whatever I had, and fold up the corners, stick them in the oven, baste them with a little butter. And I had fruit tarts. And when I had children, I would cook for them. And now I have grandchildren. And literally, I'm a hero. Because I can sit with my grandchildren and show them how to make something from scratch that lives and breathes and grows and tastes great, smells, and it's an accomplishment that it's ephemeral because it's gone and you have to do it again. It's not like making a sculpture or something. Right. It is. I can become very metaphysical about the whole thing, or I can become exactly, just get the job done and go.
Right. And same with me.
When you have those moments in the kitchen by yourself, or when Linda's there with me, it's a special time of bonding. And we do this so that families can do this, so that, it can, people used to sit around and watch Dallas 35 years ago, and they would watch it as a family, and they would talk about it, they would converse, and they would go on, and it would become part of their family culture. And I think that sort of thing has gone or diminished. And if we can get people in the kitchen having fun, baking, the kids can do what they can do, the parents can do what they can do, and everybody just gets it done. And it's another of those moments where a family can be a family.
So that's how I started this. I'm a television producer for 30 years, and I would bake on the weekends with my family. We would make pasta. We took a cooking class in Florence, and then we started making bread. Yeast breads at first, and then I was gifted a sourdough. And
oh boy,
I've been baking every day for 3 years.
Oh wow,
we do farmers markets. I bake in bulk now.
Okay,
but so I interviewed Kelly Carlin, who's George Carlin's daughter, a couple of weeks ago, and she's a public speaker and a life coach, and she's a Buddhist.
So am I.
I'm aware. And she pointed out to me, this is your meditation, Jim, because I was talking about how I love the repetition. And even if it's, I had to scale down the varieties I was making because it was getting unwieldy. So I really have perfected, for me, I'm sure it could be better, but, I've been doing the same breads over and over.
Right.
And I do love the process. And I love how, without trying hard, but just spending the time, something magical has happened. The dough, even though it's higher hydration, has become easier for me to work with. And I do wonder, from your perspective, is there some relation to Buddhism and meditation with the process of bread making?
Well, I've been a Buddhist now for over 50 years. And my form of Buddhism is morning and evening, I chant verbally out loud. And for the past, 25 years, I would take an hour every morning, no matter what my schedule was. If I had a call that was 5 o'clock in the morning on a set, for makeup, I would back up the clock because I got more out of the time spent chanting than I would have that same time as an additional 40 minutes to an hour of sleep. So I learned that early on. So there is a correlation to not just the repetitive nature of kneading the bread, but when I chant, you can chant in a very meditative state, or you can chant with your monkey brain just climbing around the jungle in your ears. It can be either way. But the chanting has the same effect, and that effect carries me through the day. And I find the same sense with doing bread. I can be in the zone, as they say, when you're doing the bread, and really get into it. And like I say, the periphery just disappears. Or I can do it while I'm watching the news.
Right.
But to me, the analogy is the same result is there. The same bread rises, the same odors come out, the same texture in your mouth is there when the job is done, whether you've been in a deep meditative state or whether you've been completely aware of your surroundings. And that to me is the magic of the process of baking. It feeds your internal needs by its repetitive nature, and I also, it's a very strange thing. I have 2 children, of course, who are now adults. They're almost 50 years old. But in the course of raising children, you get a tactile sense with your hands. You test a bottle, on the nape of your wrist, to see the temperature. I judge how much kneading and flour I do when I'm kneading the bread by feeling the moisture temperature content right at the nape of my wrist. And it inevitably reminds me of my children as babies. So I'm immediately, my brain is taken back 50 years, 40, that many years ago, just by that moisture content on my wrist. And when I feel that at the right content, whatever that word might be, I know that it's ready to put in the bowl and let it rise. And if it's too wet, I don't like it. If it's too dry, I don't like it. And again, like you, over repetitive nature, I've been doing this now for 20 years, baking my breads. And I'm like programmed like a computer in my hands and my nose. I can tell, literally that quote, when I come down in the morning, I smell that yeast. And I can tell that I call it the babies in the oven, which is probably not very PC. But I put it when the starter is taking its 8 to 10 hours, I stick it in the microwave because it's a consolidated, same temperature environment, cover it with a towel. And I can't smell it when I put it in, but when I come down in the morning, it's permeated the entire kitchen. And I just know, that baby's in the oven and it's ready to go. And I pull it out and sure enough, it's frothy and bubbly. And you realize this same yeast flew through the air in Alaska 100 years ago. And here it is. Yeah.
Now, I don't know a ton about Buddhism, but I do know quite a bit about mindfulness. I don't know if you do. But everything I hear when people talk about certain things related to Buddhism reminds me very much of mindfulness in terms of, like you were just talking about, your mind, monkey mind going in all these different directions, or being able to bake bread while watching the news or not. But funny enough, I discovered you when I was baking bread, because the only time I watch morning shows is if I'm baking bread. Otherwise, I'd be in my office, worried about, I don't know, some production or pitch or nerve-wracking, whatever. So even though my mind was distracted on, I think it was the Today Show that you guys were on, I was doing something I wouldn't normally be doing.
Right.
But that being said, I am curious about the relationship to Buddhism and mindfulness, if you know anything about this.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on mindfulness, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert on Buddhism. I am a practitioner of Buddhism. But I have, over the years, I've had discussions with almost every religious denomination that you can imagine, and very productive, nice, sharing of information type of conversations, not heated religious debates. And I have and this hopefully doesn't sound like a setup question, but there is a similarity between what I do with my baking and specifically a free, unmanufactured sourdough yeast. And the fact that yeast has been, in all intents and purposes, around forever, since the world began. I mean, there it is. So yeast has a common purpose, and then it can be used for so many different things, from making wine to what we do to, yeast cultures that, can cure infections. And now the study, you might be aware of this, is that they think that natural yeast in terms of breads breaks down the gluten that makes gluten intolerant people able to digest sourdough breads. So it has this magical content. Well, so do most philosophies at their core. They become anthropomorphized, when people start to use them as philosophies and religions, etc. But at the core is basically this compassionate denomination that nature has, and we're a part of nature. A yeast cell is part of nature, and it has a pure sort of purpose, which is what we get to experience when we bake and we see it rise and it grows and it becomes dormant again. And we see this ongoing manifest, non-manifest process going with the yeast. I think a lot of philosophies, if they would forget the human traits that have been imbued in them and went truly to the basics, I think they would find such a commonality that they can keep their personalities. People dress in different styles. That's perfectly fine. But I think, the recognition that all things, have that boson particle, if you want to get into, physics, that it is the same. It is the foundation on which the sign behind your head right now is, or the wine barrels over your right shoulder is. There's a commonality when you take it all down. And it is that life is the same. All life is the same at its basic rhythm. And so Buddhism says that. I have very good Catholic Buddhist friends. I have very good Jewish Buddhist friends who have found that commonality and say, oh, I can practice this form of Buddhism and it doesn't impede, my mental dedication to my own philosophy and religion. So that's to me the commonality that also the yeast, especially sourdough yeast, not Fleischmann's, no offense, Fleischmann's, but they were the first ones to commercially make yeast.
Yep.
But, it's not a commercial aspect of what we do, you and I, and the people that, bake with their hands for themselves. Don't take it out of the plastic wrapper, really make it grow and live and breathe and feed you. That's its purpose. It's to sustain us as our philosophies are. So I don't know mindfulness as a practice, but the little bit that I do know, there is, as you say, a great commonality.
Sure. So tell me a little bit more about Duffy's Sourdough as a business. Okay. What is the mission and what are you guys doing?
Well, this is the thing, I'm a great idea person, and then I have another glass of wine and go to sleep. So at one point, about a year and a half ago, I had baked some stuff and Linda and I were having, I think it was in the morning, sourdough pancakes. And I offhandedly said, maybe I should just do this as a profession and sell some of this. And she said, that's a great idea. Well, I forgot about it. It never left her mind. The next thing I know, she's on the computer. She's looking up business things, what it takes. She had a friend here in Colorado, which is where I'm talking to you from, who is an entrepreneur and teaches a class at the college. And we had dinner at his house, and I brought the sourdough rolls for dinner. And everybody oohed and awed, and they loved the story. So Linda and Steve, the entrepreneur, put their heads together, and Duffy's Dough was the subject matter for a semester of college course here in Colorado. He divided his classes into pods of 3 to 4 people. They took our idea. We pitched the idea to them. They took it, and for a semester, they built a business. And then they pitched it to us, a la Shark Tank. And we liked one because it was one of 2 that took the sourdough and dehydrated it, which we thought that's the absolute key to, commercially sending it any place, because as you know, you can put it in a jar and it'll blow the top off that jar if it expands at the right rate in the wrong circumstances. So shipping was a problem, and this person solved that for us. So Linda then took that, and we were on the road in the UK for 7 months doing a play. Every single day she was on the computer constructing this business, getting it from the design of the box to the logos to the trademarks to finding lawyers and accountants. And we got back to Colorado and we started this business in September. And
so that's what you're doing. You're You're specializing in dehydrated sourdough starter.
Exactly. And in its dehydrated form, the starter can just lie dormant in a jar for years on end. It
Correct.
is as if it's
absolutely.
It's basically what Fleischmann's has done in making their yeast that you can buy, and it can be in your pantry for 10 years. You open it up, put in a little water, it'll blossom. I love the blossoming of yeast anyway, commercial yeast. And then you bake with it. So dehydrated Duffy dough starter is a pure starter from Alaska without any input other than flour, sugar, and water in a dehydrated form. And then you take it and make whatever you want out of it. And that was all Linda's basically inspiration. I'm good at carrying things and pointing. And she's the person who carries out and points me in the right direction.
That's great, man. Now, you grew up in Montana?
That's right. Yeah. Little town in Montana, 600 people.
How many?
600.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Are you watching Yellowstone?
I've seen several of Yellowstone. I watch until it makes me cry because I'm not on it, and then I stop.
I've always fantasized about Montana, but that show, it's so pretty. It's so pretty how they shoot it and what they do.
It's wonderful, and it does depict Montana in a beautiful light, and it's what I grew up knowing about it, going back to it for years. But when I was starting to work consistently, getting to Montana in the 70s was a full day, if not day and a half process of you had to fly from LA to, I think, Salt Lake, and then Salt Lake to Missoula. And then Missoula, you'd get in a car wherever your place was and drive for 2 hours. It was, you can't just commute, basically. So I made Oregon my Montana. And I got a ranch in Oregon in 1990 that I've had now for over years.
Did you go to high school in Montana, in the small town?
No, I did not. I left there when I was 12 years old. That's when my dad and the family moved to Seattle. My sister was in high school. So my sister, to this day, maintains friendships that she developed when she was in high school there. When I was, I'm almost 4 years younger than my sister, and I was not in that place in school where you develop that kind of friendships. So I didn't go back to Montana on my times off very much because I had no people in common, basically. My friends are all from the Northwest.
Got it. Now, your sister was an international champion swimmer, correct?
Yes, she was an international skin diving champion. She was a competition swimmer in high school, but she fell in love with underwater. She was going to get her PhD in oceanography. And she got her master's, but she didn't make it to her PhD because she took a karate class. And in the karate class were a bunch of police officers taking class. And she switched. She did like a roundhouse for a train. She went into that class, did a 180, and came out wanting to be a policewoman. And she retired from the Seattle City Police Department about 10, 12 years ago as a lieutenant. And married a lieutenant. So they live now as far away from the Northwest as you can get in Palm Desert, California.
Is she still baking?
Oh, yes. She's a crazy baker. And to be quite honest, there were a couple of times in my college career where I killed my sourdough starter. I just totally, it was manslaughter, basically. And the good thing about it is I went back to my sister. She just pulled a starter off of hers, and I was back at it again. So, and with the dehydrated, you don't have to worry about it.
If I killed my sourdough starter, I'd be finished. I always panic about that.
Well, I do too. That's why, in our kit and in our book that we send with the recipes and the instructions and everything, the biggest letterhead and everything is when you get your starter activated, save 1 cup. Put it in the refrigerator, put it back in the jar before you do anything. Because the minute you've actually killed the essence of your starter, if you even add something other than sugar, flour, and water. Sure. We've got emails saying, "Oh, will it still be the original starter and keep forever because I put an egg in it?" I went, "No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so."
Somewhere, and I maybe it was Wikipedia or something. They talk about you going to college and blowing out your vocal cords, rupturing them. Is that what's the story behind this? How did that happen?
you're a 18 to 20-year-old Irishman who thinks he's bulletproof, and
Right.
you're in a special acting program, and everything you do seems to be great. So, I was not typical. I don't want to say every college student is like that, but I drank too much, lived too hard, and overworked my vocal cords to the point that I kept losing my upper register. And my solution was go in a room and scream and yell until your voice comes back. And it worked for a while. And quite literally one day, and I sounded like, my God, Neville Brand and who else you can imagine with that horrible voice. And I had a coughing fit during rehearsal, and they ruptured, and I coughed up blood. Went to the doctor, and they had hemorrhaged to the extent that the blood vessels didn't coagulate and heal up. So the vocal cords just kept filling up with blood until they got too much blood, and the coughing ruptured them. And the doctor said, well, we can operate and fix them. Then there'll be no guarantee what your voice will sound like with scar tissue. Or you can go on vocal rest and see if they can heal themselves. So for 4 months, I did not say a single word. I didn't hum. I didn't make them. I made 2 mistakes. Both of them were swear words that happened to come out as a knee-jerk reaction when I did something stupid. But literally for 4 months, I pretended I was incapable of speaking. I would use notepads. My sister would call me. We had a whistling format that, 2 whistles yes, 1 whistle no, et cetera. And she would check in on me. I would go to the grocery store with a notepad, and if questions were asked, I would write. And people thought I was a mute, anybody who didn't know me. And then I finally was given permission by my vocal doctor to start briefly talking. But the rules were I couldn't talk in a room with more than 2 people. I couldn't talk when the television or the radio or anything was on. I was not allowed to talk in an automobile or a moving object. And they were all things because I had to start literally from scratch again with baby vocal cords. And I ended up getting back on stage. I recovered to the extent that I started my theatrical career, although 2 years late because I had to drop out of the program I was in. I started again. I did theater for a while, went to New York, did a couple of off Broadway showcases, finally got to LA and landed Man from Atlantis. And from 1976 on, I never stopped working.
Wow. Now, was this when you started studying how to become a mime?
Well, mime was part of our schooling in the program. And what that did for me was when I was unable to act on stage, I could teach movement classes to small groups of students, et cetera. So I was able to eke out a living doing that. But interesting thing also is at the same time my vocal cords blew out, I met the woman who became my wife, who was the person who introduced me to Buddhism. And when I told her, I'm never going to act again because this is my problem, she said, "Oh, that's your problem. You're right. But because it's your problem, you can fix it. So here's this thing I do." And she taught me how to chant. And it was the worst thing I could do for my voice. I would chant literally for 5 minutes and my voice would disappear. And she would say, "No, that's like," she was a ballet dancer. She said, "That's like sore muscles when you do ballet. Just relax, take your time, do it again." And literally, it was the chanting that exercised my vocal cords the proper way. Because I chanted very softly to the beginning. And I ended up, on stage, grateful. And it was one of the first big things that I saw that this practice of Buddhism could do. It was a repetitive nature. It also had a mystical side. It was that common thing. If my vocal cords are the same as everything else, then I can direct their process. And that's what I did.
It's amazing. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining me. Give me the proper name of your company.
It's called Duffy's Dough, DUFFYS DOUGH. And if you go to duffysdough.com, it'll take you to the website. There's, all kinds of things, silly stuff that Linda and I do because we love it.
Awesome. All right, Patrick, thank you so much. It's nice getting to know you. I'm really intrigued by your journey, and happy holidays, and have a great time. I hope you spend it with the family, man.
I'm going to do that. We're going to try and see if we can invent eggnog sourdough pancakes.
And then you should dehydrate them. We could ship them around the country. All right, Patrick.
Okay. Take care, Jim. Thank you so much.
You too. This episode of Bread for the People was brought to you by Side Hustle Bread, Long Island's handcrafted artisanal bread company. Side Hustle Bread is a family-run business that's bringing the neighborhood feel back to Long Island one loaf at a time. If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to head on over to iTunes and rate and review this episode. Reviewing and rating is the most effective way to help us grow our audience. This episode was produced by Milestone TV and Film. I'm your host, Jim Serpico. Blessed be the bread, everyone.